views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, and welcome to Open 2.0. I'm your host, Ryan Barnes. On this edition of Open 2.0, we will be discussing the human library, a new trend where individuals come to engage in conversations about life experiences with another individual. Joining us to discuss this further are Rebecca Arzola, Robert Farrell, and Joan Jocson-Singh. How are you doing?
Hi.
Absolutely. So could you please start by telling us what is the human library?
Well, the Human Library is a worldwide movement for social change, and it was started by Ronnie Abergel and friends from Denmark in the year 2000. And they did it to bring together people to talk about their lives, to kind of reduce or talk about bias, prejudice, and stereotypes.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of already told us how it kind of began in the history of it. Mm-hmm. So who can take part in the human library?
Well, it's in Lehman College, and so students, faculty, and staff can take part in this semester.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. I guess for you two, Robert and Joan, I understand that the human library also has something called human books. Would you like to tell us about those?
Sure. So in the first iteration of the Human Library at the Leonard Lief Library, I did participate as a human book. And a human book is someone who's there, who has a story to tell, who's organized that story as a book would be organized with chapters. And the person who comes to the library, to the Human Library, can check us out, can take us to a table and ask us questions after we tell our stories. And it's a really wonderful exchange of ideas that takes place in that dialogue.
Awesome. Would either of you like to tell us about a little kind of anecdote about a time where you've had been checked out, or a little story that you might have told?
Well, I guess I'll do that since Joan hasn't.
I haven't. I'm going to be participating in Thursday's this year's iteration of Human Library. So I'm excited though. Yeah. But if you wanted to talk a little bit about your experience, that's fine.
Sure. So one of the experiences I had was with a colleague, and she checked me out, and we had our conversation. And through the time that we were talking, she started revealing more of her story. It turned out that, like me, one of the people very close to her had a serious illness. Part of my story is telling the story of having cancer when I was around your age, in fact, just out of high school, and how that impacted my development as a student, but also as a writer. And she knew somebody who was also a young person. And another person that I ended up talking to as well had just come out of high school, was a freshman here at Lehman. She had a friend who was going through cancer treatments at that time too, so we were able to talk about her experience, and she was a writer as well. So just a kind of interesting connections that came through were part of the process of going through the checkout and discussion that takes place following it.
That's great. Thank you so much for telling us about your little story there. So being part of the Human Library, I feel like it's extremely vulnerable to want to really share your story. So I guess what do you feel is the need for the Human Library? What do you feel like you can get out of it, being in such a vulnerable state?
Well, I think today people need to just listen to other people instead of, I think right now people talk over people or to people and not have a conversation where you learn about the other person's life. I think that's needed even more. And in a college setting, the human books can help other students or staff or faculty deal with their own issues. And You know, that's the main thing. It's just communication and talking about bias and stereotypes and prejudice. And when you talk to someone who's different from you or who you haven't spoken to before, you really learn something different. You learn about their background and their situation instead of a story on the news or a group of people. You speak directly to one person and you learn so much more.
That's great. So could either you or anybody, as a matter of fact, tell us how you actually got started in the Human Library? How you kind of became involved with it?
Yeah, well, I went to a meeting. It was like a professional development meeting for librarians, and one of the presentations was on the Human Library, which I thought was, at first, a weird title. I'm like, Human Library, what are they doing to these people? I don't know. And there's human books, and what's happening? But then as I, learned more, it's about people just talking to people, and that a person is a book, and they're kind of an open book, and someone checks them out like a book, and they're different stories. This semester we have approximately seven books that are going to be showing up, and a person can read their title and their story and see if they're interested, and that's how it got started. I thought that was great as a librarian. I thought it fit really well.
And just to jump on that, we have a diversity and inclusion committee at the library. And so this just I chair that, and this kind of fell into what are we doing at the library that really brings in diversity and inclusion with the students and the community. And for me, I was excited when Rebecca approached me to take part, because I feel like some of my research and my background was researching metal music as an academic study and gender. And so I was curious, wanting to share my story to other students, women who may be part of subcultures that are challenging, where they have to negotiate being part of that. And I thought, what better way can I share that kind of experience than be a book myself?
Awesome. Could you folks tell us, what does the phrase "don't judge a book by its cover" mean to you, considering human books are kind of a thing?
I can answer that again, too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we all have identities, right? And there's a thing called identity politics. And I think that when presented, people, just like books, can get judged in a second with how you're dressed, how you look, how you present yourself. And this is sort of to take away that layer for students and people who, are just quick to make a judgment call on a person. And so by being part of this human library, you could, I have tattoos, but does that mean I'm a bad person? It doesn't have kind of that stigma that it used to have back in the day. And so these are the things that we sort of want students and people who are going to borrow kind of negotiate with and challenge and ask questions about, to really broaden their idea of what they might conceive of a person just by the cover.
Yeah, and I think, Ryan, you had mentioned the idea of vulnerability. And I think there's a lot of things that we don't really talk about in the workplace or to colleagues or to students. We kind of live within the roles that we take on. And, when you have a book, you open the cover, you get deeper into it and maybe discover things that aren't there on the surface, and that we can share these difficult experiences in our lives sometimes, or things that we don't normally talk about in the spaces that we normally inhabit.
I also think people will become more vulnerable when it's a one-on-one situation, when they're not presenting in front of an audience, but one-on-one, as someone asks questions, they may ask them something that it's like, oh, wow, I haven't thought about that in a long time, or it touches something, and, it's, I don't know.
Yeah, it is touching, emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, very. Do you folks feel that you would change anything about your life or change anything about your narrative or about your story that you would share to people? And if so, why?
Well, can you rewrite your own book? Yeah, that is an interesting question. Would I rewrite my book? I can say that as a cancer survivor, that was a very difficult experience. Perhaps not something that I would choose to live again, but it's also something that's really shaped me very deeply, and my life took on a different direction. Where would I be if I hadn't had that experience? I don't know. So I'm kind of okay with where I'm at. I like the book that I've written, that we've written as colleagues too, that you're where you are, and sometimes being able to tell your story is a way of accepting that and kind of getting a deeper understanding of it. So I don't think I would rewrite it.
I would second that. I don't think I would rewrite my book. in the course of the research I've done, I've interviewed women and asked them about, challenges that they face in the workplace or even just being part of the musical subculture that they're in. And, to borrow a term from today, I got woke. So, like, I don't know where I would be if I hadn't, picked this trajectory, and it shaped me to who I am today, which is, really wanting to learn more about other people. And, I think a special thing will happen when I get checked out. I think I'm going to learn more about the other person than they do from me. So.
Nice.
And you learn a lot about yourself.
Right.
I mean, that was my experience for sure.
Absolutely. So some of you probably touched on it, but why do you feel that your books or that your stories are important? What kind of people do you want to share your story to? How do you want to affect other people? I know it's kind of a loaded question, but.
It's a good question.
Well, my book is about juggling a bunch of different things. So it's called You Can Do It All, metal, music, scholar, mom, gamer. And so there's all these hats when somebody looks at me and they're like, oh, you play RPG tabletop games, or you read comic books, or, you have tattoos. And I kind of want to take away that layer and let them know, like, you can do all this and be in academia, write about music, and, follow your passion, even though you have challenges to face.
Yeah, I think with my book, like, who would I want to read my book? I think anyone who wants to discover something about a world that they're not familiar with. And I think that's one of the nice things about books in general, that you never know what's going to happen or who's going to connect with it. So I hope that just random people are interested in checking my book out, not just a specific kind of person, because I think that idea of discovery is something that is essential to reading and to these conversations.
Nice. So kind of a wrap-up question, where do you folks see the Human Library going? Do you see it expanding to other schools? Do you see it being all around the world with many different narratives? Where do you think this will go?
I definitely, well, this is already kind of a worldwide thing, and we're the first college, Lehman College, to have a human library in New York City. So that's exciting, and I hope that other CUNY libraries follow, as well as public libraries, other places in New York City, because it's an important project. So I hope it grows.
Awesome. Well, thank you folks for your time. Before we go, we would love to hear about some upcoming events coming up. I remember you mentioned the one coming up on Thursday, contact info, social media, all that good stuff.
Okay, I think we have some readings coming up in the library. I'm not sure exactly the names right now.
We just had a zine event,
Yes.
Which was focused on diversity and inclusion, but we're hoping to maybe do something with the Human Library in the fall, so that's something to think about. Like Rebecca said, there's some reading events coming up. All these things you can check out and see on the Lehman Library website. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Tweet to us. Yeah.
That's right. www.lehman.edu. So you can get all the info.
Awesome. Well, thank you folks so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your stories with us, and thank you for being here.
Thanks
Thank
for having
you.
us.
Thanks, Ryan.
Absolutely. So, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. But I'd like to thank you, the viewers, and also our guests for watching and tuning in. For more, you can follow us on social media at BronxNet TV. Until next time, I'm Ryan Barnes, and have a beautiful day.